My name is Dory Kirschner. I am the executive director of an organization called Matan. I am so happy to be here with some of the most knowledgeable colleagues that I have in the field. And we just can't wait to dive into the actual content that we've prepared for everyone today of how to ensure accessible events. I will be introducing Lauren Applebaum, who works with Respectability, as well as Rebecca Winetic, who oversees an initiative called Metro West Able. And you'll hear much more about what both of them do and what their agencies are best known for in the next few minutes. So I want to welcome everyone. I think we can dive into the slides now. Josh, please. Okay, so we are really grateful to our co-partners and co-promoters. There are, as you can see, a ton to list, but we wanted to thank in particular some of the organizations such as Metro West Able and other places that represent all sorts of movements and perspectives in the Jewish community. It really spans the gamut. This series in particular has been made possible by the support of the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles, the Diane and Guilford Glazer Philanthropies, the Charles and Lynn Schusterman Family Foundation, the David Berg Foundation, the Stanford and Joan Alexander Foundation, as well as the Beverly Foundation and the Black Family Foundation. So thank you to the Jewish community for helping make this possible and accessible to all of us. Next slide, please. Okay, so just a quick announcement, and that is that this is a series of 8 webinars. We are, I believe, number 5. And there are 3 left over the course of the summer with varying topics. Okay, we just got a question. I just want to assure people this is being recorded. And the PowerPoint deck, which we will go through, will be posted within the hour so that people will be able to access the content heavy slides. Next slide, please. Okay, so in terms of what we feel the landscape is vis-a-vis disability in the Jewish community, let's see. According to the US Census, 1 in 5 people in America has a physical, sensory, cognitive, mental health, or other type of disability. Respectability, the sponsoring partner in this endeavor, polled over 4,000 Jewish people and found that for 90% of the respondents, disability inclusion is very much top of mind. Respectability's nonprofit survey that they issued does, however, point out that there is a gap in between what we as a Jewish community should be doing versus what we all are doing, and that we can be doing more. And while the studies showed there's a tremendous will to be better and more inclusive and more accessible, the knowledge of how to do so is not pervasive. And that's what this series was created to do, was try to fill that gap. Next slide, please. So I just want to quickly reintroduce myself for people that have hopped on since the beginning. I'm Dory Kirschner. I'm the executive director of an organization called Matan. You'll hear more about that later. The colleagues that I have the honor of being in conversation with today are Lauren Applebaum, who's the Vice President of Communications at Respectability, Becca Winetic, the Manager of Community Inclusion for Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West, which is in New Jersey. I want to take a quick peek at the chat box just to say that Lauren wants to ensure that if you're looking for the running live transcript, the link to see that is in the chat. And let's see, and we are on Facebook Live simultaneously. If you need that link, if this is not working best for you, please click on the link, and there is a series of very specific instructions on how to see the ASL interpreter most easily, which is Zoom versus Facebook Live. Somebody thanked us for acknowledging that disability is still something that needs tremendous work in the Jewish community. And we're really grateful to have you, the voices, here today. That's exactly why we're still in business, is because we're still trying to help build the capacity of the Jewish community to get it right. So next slide, please. Okay, so the first question that I would like to ask, and she will take the opportunity to also introduce herself and her role. The first question I'm posing to Becca from Metro West ABLE. What are some of the most common accessibility challenges, Becca, when you're planning in-person events? And what are some of the solutions that you have found to be most effective?
Thank you, Dory. So I'll take a moment just to quickly introduce myself, and then I'll get into the questions. So I'm Rebecca Winetic, and I am the Manager of Community Inclusion for the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West. And on my next slide, it actually has a little bit more information about my specific program. But when you ask the question about barriers, and I pose that question to our community members, often what comes up is that finances are a tremendous barrier to accessibility, that people feel like it's going to be tremendously costly to create programs that are fully accessible for people. And I challenge the community members often as to, if they had all the money in the world, would they really be able to promote access, or is there a greater barrier there? And I think that the question often comes up as to whether it's finances or the attitudes and practices that really go along with creating an inclusive community. And so we're going to talk a little bit today in my first section of the presentation to answer some of those questions. But let me just tell you a little bit about the program that I coordinate. So I have been a part of the Jewish Federation of Greater Metro West for the last 12 years, and I coordinate the department Greater Metro West ABLE, which stands for Access, Belonging, and Life Enrichment for people with disabilities and their families. And the ultimate goal, our mission for our department, is to create a Jewish community that's made whole by the meaningful inclusion of all of its members. And we do this together as a community. I don't operate in a silo within Federation. I don't operate in a silo within a synagogue, but we really support the collaboration and the coordination of our partner agencies within the community. And I recognize that our community is rather unique in that we have 10 partner agencies that support people with disabilities and their families. And not every community has that network. And I work with our congregations and our partners in the community to really promote the development of meaningful opportunities for all aspects, for access to all aspects of Jewish communal life. And I hope to get the word out to raise awareness of the resources that exist in the community. I want to thank Respectability for this opportunity today, for inviting me to be a part of this, and certainly for coordinating this really important series. I'm excited to be able to share some of the work that we do locally, and to have our other community partners also share their work. So 12 years ago, our federation was the first nationally to staff somebody in a disability inclusion role. I'm proud to say now that 12 years later, there's probably about 10 of us nationally in this disability inclusion role. And we do network and share with one another as well. Next slide, please. So this building happens to be my own congregation. This is Morristown Jewish Center. Our building is about 100 years old, and that poses some physical challenges for access within the building. You know, the only ramp into the building is on the front of the building, while our parking is all the way around back. Over the last several years, we have done tremendous work to be able to create a physically accessible space and putting in a lift now to be able to get to our primary program spaces. But while we were faced with some physical challenges, the mindset in communicating belonging and inclusion has always been a part of who we are. As I do my work in the community with other congregations, you know, I hear lots of different stories from clergy and lay leadership in the community. About 11 years ago, when we did our first Jewish Disability Awareness and Inclusion Month program, I was encouraging congregations to take something on for a special Shabbat Shalem, a Shabbat of inclusion or a whole Shabbat. And I had one rabbi who said to me, he's like, all right, he's like, I'll do something, but it doesn't really, this doesn't really apply to my congregation. I think we're all set. You know, I'm not sure we have people with disabilities, and I think that we're doing a good job. Gave a beautiful Dvar Torah on Friday night. And at the Oneg afterwards, had a congregant, a longtime congregant, come up to him and say, wow, thank you so much. Did you know that I have a family member at home who I've never brought to shul because I didn't know there was a place here for him? And that rabbi was floored, had no idea that this congregant had a family member at home with a disability that never felt welcomed into their congregation. And almost overnight changed the culture of their community. And I think that's one of the things that we can learn, is that we don't know what we don't know. And we often have to ask different questions and use language that is welcoming to encourage our community to speak up and to share what their needs are. Now with COVID especially, I think that we need to think in new and creative ways about access. And I know Lauren is going to share a little bit later about access in a virtual setting. I'm going to focus my remarks today on the access piece for programming in person in our congregations. Next slide, please. So I believe that when we speak about access, we often think about physical access. We think about all these things on the screen. We think about physically getting into a building, sign language interpreters, assisted listening devices. These are all really important things to consider. They should not be forgotten, but they're not the be all and end all to access even in an in-person setting. Next slide, please. So I think it's really important to think about how we relate to others as an access point. The give and take of our community, the building of relationships, creating inclusion and belonging, and the reciprocity of community. I do a lot of work with congregations in our community in workshopping how to create more inclusive congregational environments. And this reciprocity of building community is one of the things that has come through loud and clear recently in conversations with lay leadership. That it's not about what we do for somebody, but it's what we get to do together. It's how we support one another in community. And I certainly think that through COVID, that this is coming through even more so. Next slide, please. So I love this. I borrowed it from somebody else, but diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, and belonging is dancing like no one's watching. And I think when we think about access, it's more than just getting in the door. We can open our doors and we can ask people to come in, but without making our environments, our experiences, and our communities truly welcoming, the physical access is truly meaningless. We need to create communities of belonging that should always be a part of our access plan. We should plan for how we engage with our community, with one another, and not just what we do for one another. Again, thinking about that reciprocity piece, how we build community together. Next slide, please. So Synagogue is my home away from home for my family, and it's certainly what I want for my community. We know how to get into the building, how to find a seat, where to find a siddur, a talis, a kippah for my boys, how to access the bima, and how to listen to prayer. Coming into our synagogues should not be like an I Spy game. We can do better, and we can train our lay leadership to have these items visible and to communicate what's available to those that are coming in. Next slide, please. So with clergy and lay leadership in our community, we created a synagogue self-assessment. We'll share it afterwards, and I'm gonna put it in the chat box as well, a link to find it. We've divided the self-assessment into two categories: architectural accessibility, that physical piece, and the synagogue life, the attitudes, practices, and policies that go along with it. We've also prioritized the tool into no cost, low cost, and high cost items. Because what we found was that synagogues were telling us that money was a barrier, but so many of these things are no cost or low cost items. And when you can actually see it on paper and you can do a self-assessment of your own community, you see how quickly you can make a greater impact. Next slide, please. So these are just snippets from the self-assessment about the architectural accessibility. We certainly look at the parking area, non-worship and worship areas. I would encourage people to think about universal design. It's a way of thinking about design of an environment so that it can be accessed, understood, and used to the greatest extent possible by all people. Our congregations are now thinking about physically reopening their doors and what they need to do to physically change their environment to meet the health and safety needs, while for many, these accommodations may be everyday routine. When we think about how COVID has affected our physical access to our community, it makes us recognize that for some of us, these guidelines, these new barriers that are being put in place, are a forever reality for some people. And while for others, they may be just that moment in time. Next slide, please. So these are some of the highlighted pieces from the self-assessment about synagogue life. Getting people in the door, again, is just a tiny piece of it. And these are often some of the greatest challenges that we face when we're talking about shifting mindset and planning for access. We want to make people feel and create a community of belonging that's often a more difficult piece. They're the low cost pieces, and they can make a tremendous impact. The power of language here truly stands out. When we think about including specific language in our membership materials or our religious school applications, and Dory may talk a little bit about some of that. When we're sharing resources in the community about what's available for others. And when we truly train our staff and our lay leadership so that they can better meet the needs of the community. Next slide, please. So I have a one-pager that I often share with our synagogues or with our agencies about programming with an inclusive eye. I encourage our agencies and our congregations to put language on their materials that demonstrates that they are inclusive in practice. This tagline actually comes from our federation, and we proudly put it on all of our programming materials. Building an inclusive community is a priority. Contact us and we'll make every effort to meet your needs. We have community members that never participated in programming previously that will reach out to us and say, I need to be able to get into a program early, or I'm gonna need a sign language interpreter. Can you help us with that? And we're opening the door for people that may have never come to programs before. Think about your physical space. Is it physically accessible? Can you provide a quiet area for people to be able to take a break if needed? Can you have reserved seating, either up close or in the back if an environment is overstimulating? Can you think about timing of a program? I know many congregations will open up their Purim carnivals a little bit early for children with special needs or sensory needs to be able to come in and participate in an environment that's a little bit quieter before the crowd grows around them. My older son, when he was young, couldn't walk into a room, into a program that was full. We always arrived early because that was what he needed. He needed the crowd to be able to grow around him and not be able to not walk into a crowded room. Remember to think about microphones and utilizing volunteers to be able to help get the word out about what resources are available. And think about that physical access of assisted listening devices or ASL interpreters or CART. Next slide, please. So I love this quote by Brene Brown, and I use it a lot. So if I get to be me, I belong. And if I have to be like you, I fit in. I think it's really important for us to create environments where people can come and feel like they belong, that they're a part of our Jewish community. I use another quote from one of my colleagues, Lisa Friedman. And she said, accommodations are important, awareness is necessary, but inclusion is not a program. Inclusion is what we do. It's the attitude we have, it's the way we treat others and the way they treat us. Inclusion is the opportunity to learn together and from one another. And we do it because it's the right thing to do, period. Inclusion is right, inclusion is just, so we do it. It's not a service, a placement, or a program. Inclusion is a mindset. And if I get to be me, I belong. And if I have to be like you, I just fit in. So thank you. I'm happy to take questions either now or I think we're going to do it at the very end. Great.
Yes, so thank you, Becca.
Okay, thank you.
I just wanted to ask for the next slide, please, because we're going to move into right. So I'm now posing a very similar question to Lauren, but this applies to events that, especially due to COVID, we have all seen a huge transition from in-person events to virtual events. And Lauren, the question that I'd like to pose to you today, same, sort of sensibility. What are some of the most common accessibility challenges when planning virtual events? And what are some of the solutions that you and Respectability, your team, have found to be the most effective that you can share with us?
Okay. The first thing I want to say is the ASL interpreter has just dropped and we are trying to get him back. And since we're talking about accessible virtual events, this is a great example. And we're actually going to pause for a moment while we get him back, because I know that there are people who are utilizing Justin. And so, so I do apologize for pausing for a moment, but we want to make sure that we are accessible to all. So,
and I want to welcome everybody who's come on. We've grown a lot over the past, let's say even 10 minutes. So I want to assure people that this webinar is being recorded. It will be captioned and available very soon. And everyone will also have access to the various PowerPoint slides. So I just want to assure everyone who's come on that we promise to share with you. And yes, a written transcript, thank you, Arlene, a written transcript will also be available.
And for folks who are utilizing our ASL interpreter, Justin, I want to just reiterate that we actually did pause during that time while Justin was off, so you did not miss anything. I also want to share that there is a running transcript going, and that the transcript itself will be cleaned up, because we actually received a question asking, is this a machine learning or is it a real person? And yes, it is a real person doing this live transcript, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that in this presentation. But before we go on, I was asked to kind of introduce myself and tell you a little bit about who I am. My name is Lauren Applebaum, and I'm the VP of Communications at Respectability, and I handle a bunch of different things under my portfolio, including outreach to the entertainment industry, as well as kind of general communications work. And when COVID-19 kind of hit and we were seeing a lot of things changing, my colleague Eric and I actually compiled a toolkit on how to ensure that your virtual events are accessible. And so a lot of the tips that I'm going to be talking about are coming from this toolkit, which we will share the link for, and it will also be included in an email that will be sent to everyone who has registered for this Zoom call. If you are joining us on Facebook and you want to receive that toolkit, we will put a comment in there for those of you watching on Facebook as well, for the link for you to be able to access that toolkit as well. And I want to reiterate that toolkit is a living document. Things are changing, platforms are changing. As things are updated, we're updating it. If you notice something that's updated, let us know and we'll incorporate it. We also received a question about being able to provide information in the chat about other organizations programming around disabilities. Sure, this is a platform for all. This is an open source in the way of sharing content that folks can be. I am just double checking and making sure that there are no other questions process questions. Okay, next slide, please. So you need to really be thinking about accessibility before you start planning the event. Next slide. So when you start doing it at the planning process, then life is going to be easier for you. You might think that, oh gosh, there's all this other stuff I need to be thinking about. But if you try and do it at the end, it's going to be a more difficult process. And why is this important? This is important for the 20% of people in the US who are deaf or hard of hearing. That's 48 million Americans. The more than 1 million people in the US who are blind, and more than 12 million who have low vision. The more than 5 million people in the US who are English language learners. And while not everyone knows they have one, it is likely that more than 40 million Americans have some sort of learning disability. Next slide, please. So it's vitally important to think through every step and every use of the event before implementation step. After all, as I mentioned, it's easier to make changes during the planning stages than after the fact. Next slide. And a picture that was on that previous slide is of one of our fellows, Laka. She's sitting in her home office and she is modeling wearing a mask as well. And she has 2 computers up. Next slide, please. So next, I'm going to talk about before the event. Next slide. Different things in terms of before the event. Let's talk about invitation format. And that is for both virtual events and non-virtual events. Ensuring things like images and logos have alt text, which are image descriptions for people who are blind and use screen readers. Having a plain text version of the invite. Some systems like Eventbrite, which I know many people use, are not accessible to people who use screen readers. Google Forms, however, are accessible. Figuring out a way to do a user test. Can someone using a screen reader access all fields on the form? Next slide, please. So on the sign-up form, ask registrants if they need an accommodation to effectively participate in an event. We included some language there that you can utilize. For example, to request accommodations, please either include the request in the RSVP form or contact name of person at phone number or email address. It's important to offer both an email address and a phone number for people to reach out, and to include a real person. And so even if it's a team of people answering, it's good to just pick one and use a real name. And then many will set a deadline of 48 hours before the event to request any accommodations. For example, when you're trying to set up ASL interpreters or captioning, you might not be able to do it last minute. Next slide, please. So a question about how do we manage if folks register last minute? And this is something that happen all the time. So we do what we can. And I know, so we currently use the sign language company right now. And I know the guy, Bill, over there who runs it, sometimes he might get a little upset when I call and say, hey, we have another event. It's starting in an hour and we just received a request for an ASL interpreter. And if he can find someone, he will. But that's why it's important to say that you need requests 48 hours in advance. So that way you're going to do the best you can to accommodate them. But if it's a last minute request, they will be understanding that you might not be able to. But they might have another solution. They might know an ASL interpreter personally, or they might know a captionist or something. So you can reach out to them and they can be part of the solution as well. Information to provide in the invitation: how long the event will last and the format of the event. Will participants be on video or audio for discussion, or will they be more likely like spectators like this is watching a presentation? If there will be an icebreaker or questions for everyone to answer, let attendees know that ahead of time so they can prepare if they want. Encourage attendees to send questions or comments in advance. And this is helpful to both participants who may want more time to prepare, as well as to presenters so we can frame our comments. And if there will be time for live Q&A, share that information in the invite. Next slide, please.
So, Lauren, we had a request for you, if you can. I know we're trying to accomplish a lot in a very short period of time, but to slow your cadence a little bit, because it's easier for some people to take all the information in that way.
I apologize. As you will see, I'm trying to get a lot of information in a short period of time, but I will do my best to speak slower. Thank you. Having accommodations for individuals who do not have access to video conferencing. For example, people might not have good Wi-Fi. So offering an option for attendees to dial in by phone, which people can do for this. Next slide, please. Ensuring accessible documents. So I know that there were individuals who request this PowerPoint ahead of time because you might be using a screen reader and not be able to actually view this PowerPoint. So we have done so. There is a link on here on tips on how to ensure an accessible PowerPoint. And then for Word documents, having a text-only version for people who request one. Next slide, please. So now we're going to talk about during the event. Next slide, please. Best practices for meetings. We're going to talk about meetings and events. Each person should say their name every time they begin speaking. Any individual not speaking should be on mute and have video off. We're talking about sometimes there can be 20 people on a meeting. A moderator would manage turn taking. For people who are nonverbal, giving them the option to share thoughts if others are doing so verbally, for example, through the chat box. Having the ASL interpreter video staying on all the time, and having a 10-minute break every hour or so. Next slide, please. Live audio description. You may have noticed when there was a photo, I described what was on that photo for people who could not see it. Even if you made the PowerPoint accessible, people will not be able to use screen readers for the PowerPoint being shown on screen during the event. They'll only be able to do it if they're sent their own copy to use ahead of time. And then if video clips don't include audio description, the speaker should explain the visuals prior to showing the video. And there's a resource on here for people to learn more. Next slide, please. During the event, we're going to talk about some live captioning. Next slide, please. So benefits of live captioning. These are for people who are both deaf and hard of hearing, which people will think of instantly, but also people who have learning disabilities, people whose first language is not English, and really for everyone. Sometimes, being able to read the live captions can greatly ease the cognitive load of a video meeting or event. And I know that many of us may be on Zoom for hours and hours and hours, so it can be quite helpful. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk about CART, which is what we're using today, which is a live transcriber with a third-party captioning service. Several services allow for that to happen, including Zoom, Adobe Connect, and WebEx. Now, ahead of this presentation, I actually sent the PowerPoint to our captioners. So they were able to know the names of the people speaking and anything where it wouldn't be obvious to spelling and familiarize themselves with everything. Next slide, please. There's also automatic speech recognition, which you'll notice in some platforms such as BlueJeans, GoToMeeting, Microsoft Teams. Some have limits, like Skype is limited up to 50 people. I apologize, my O key sticks a bit, and so I'm noticing that I have some double O's in places where I should only have one, so I apologize for that spelling error getting through. But Skype is really only limited up to 50 people, restriction captioning for larger meetings behind a paywall. Google Hangout Meets also is limited to paid GC customers. And then Zoom does allow for integration with a speech-to-text app with high-quality ASR, but only for paid Zoom accounts. Next slide, please. So it's important, I'm sharing two examples, and I want to let you know that what we're using right now is one CAP app. And so it's important, in my view, when you can, to actually use a real person, because automatic speech recognition is going to have errors. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk a little bit about ASL interpreters. Next slide, please. So in a situation like this, many people can read captions, not all, but especially if you're having a meeting or an opportunity for people to engage, folks who are deaf or hard of hearing will not be able to fully participate without ASL interpreters. Also for events that involve complex subject matter and technical terms or industry-specific terminology, viewers will find that automatic captioning, and in some cases even live captioning solutions, struggle to maintain a reasonable minimum level of quality and legibility for the user. An ASL interpreter is going to be usually better at that, especially in instances like this, where when we request the ASL interpreter, we're able to share the topic. So we make sure that the service is able to have interpreters who are understanding. And just like with live captionists, sharing names of speakers and materials ahead of time so interpreters can become familiar with the materials. Next slide, please.
So Lauren, there's still a request for an even slower cadence so that everyone can take it all in.
Okay.
Okay. I know it's hard. I know it's hard. Yeah.
No, thank you. So we want to talk about spotlighting a video during webinars, and I have been receiving different notes in the chat box right now. So if there are, and I know that Zoom constantly does updates and it changes if you're on a computer, or if you're on a tablet, or if you're on a phone. So we really appreciate when you share feedback so we can make our programs better. The best accessibility is when you're on a computer screen, but I know that other folks are going to be using a tablet or a phone. But if we were not sharing a PowerPoint right now, you would be seeing in gallery view, you'd be seeing 4 boxes of Rebecca, Dory, myself, and Justin, who is our ASL interpreter. If we were to spotlight a video, for example, spotlight my video while I am speaking, that would mean that people who wanted to see the ASL interpreter would not be able to. So we recommend to never spotlight a video, because that means you're only seeing the video of the active speaker. That would also mean if you have someone who is deaf who is signing, the video that you would be seeing would be of the ASL interpreter voicing for that deaf panelist instead. So we always talk about ensuring gallery view. And when screen sharing, we ensure video gallery is set to side-by-side view so participants see the materials, the individual speaking, and the ASL interpreter. Next slide, please. Hiring a sign language interpreter. Best practice is to book at least 2 weeks prior to the event. Ensure that this interpreter is certified, and I included a link on where you can check that. Next slide, please.
I think there was a question also, I'm sorry, Lauren, about just Hebrew ASL and making things, you know, if there's a difference between interpreters and things like that.
Yes. So, and there also can be for the communities where some people live, you know, where you might want to incorporate Spanish as well. So there are different, and this could be a whole other hour conversation, but just like, you know, there's English and Spanish and Hebrew, there are different sign languages. And so it's important, if you are looking for someone to be interpreting Hebrew, that they know Hebrew Sign Language. And there is and I've been in situations before where people will actually interpret in different ways, where someone will actually interpret it from Hebrew to English, and then there are all different combinations of making that happen for different viewers who are looking for different experiences.
Thank you.
Next slide, please. So so we're talking about kind of after the event. So what we're going to do with this video, and especially for those of you who are finding my speech too fast and you want to review it, you'll be able to watch it. But we're not going to have it up right away, because before we put it up, we're going to add open captions. And so in addition to seeing me and seeing Justin, you're going to be able to see full open captions. And so 41% of videos are actually incomprehensible without sound or captions. 80% of viewers react negatively to videos autoplaying with sound. So therefore, many social media outlets will autoplay videos on silent. So if you record your event and plan on sharing the video, it really is crucial that you have accurate captions. Next slide, please. I'm going to talk a brief moment about the difference between subtitles and captions. Subtitles will only reflect what is being spoken. Captions go a step further by also including non-spoken information, including laughter, applause, music, environmental sounds. And open captions are always visible. Some stats that I think are important: 85% of Facebook videos are watched without sound. 92% of mobile users watch video with the sound off. And then closed captions can be turned on or off by view on TV and social media platforms. Next slide, please. And I also want to share that very few American Jews know Hebrew Sign Language. I'm being shared that. So best practice would be to sign the English meaning, which would mean that the interpreter would either have to know how to translate or have something in front of them of what the English actually is. YouTube. YouTube offers automatic free captions similar to subtitles. Note that speakers will not be identified, certain words will not be accurate, and there will not be any punctuation, but it is completely free for you to edit it. Oh, and another correction, and I really appreciate this, the language is called Israeli Sign Language, not Hebrew Sign Language. Thank you, Susan, for sharing that information. And so when we're talking about YouTube, what's great about it is it's completely free. And for those of you that have interns, it's a perfect activity for them to do, or people who volunteer. There's also a link on this slide that can kind of go through the details on how to add accurate captions. Next slide, please. So this is the link to the actual toolkit. I wanted to answer one question, if that's okay, that was asking about determining whether you need an ASL interpreter in addition to captions. Is it only by request? So, it can be by request, and I think that really determines how big your event is and how big of a nonprofit or synagogue you are and what your budget is. Captions, I think, can be utilized by more people. However, to keep in mind that that if someone is deaf and does not speak, they're not going to be able to participate in the way that most other people are going to be able to participate, because they're going to be stuck in more of just a watching view versus being able to engage. I think there'll be more questions at the end, but I think that was my last slide. Next slide.
Yes. Okay. Thank you, Lauren. And I do want to say there are a handful of questions that have kind of lined up that you may want to take a look at while I'm talking. So, because it's really good information to then share back with the whole group. So thank you. So Matan, our mission is to assume that if 1 in 5 people in the United States describes themselves as living with a disability, we want to make sure that Jewish professionals, communities, and families are able to create and sustain inclusive settings in educational, communal, and spiritual aspects of Jewish life. And I want to dovetail with what Becca said. This must be seen as a reciprocal relationship. that it is not, you cannot possibly have a Jewish community without all members being there. And so belonging is much different than just making attempts to include. So we all need to continue working on it. It's a process, but hopefully we'll get to the top of that mountain. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, what Matan does throughout the year is we focus on training professionals. And by the way, this is even pre-pandemic, both in person and virtually. And we do so for many different types of educational settings and communal settings, such as congregational schools, early childhood, camp, day schools, youth groups, and more. We have a lot of resources that Matan's staff has created. Almost all offerings are free and downloadable. We also conduct needs assessment and make recommendations for communities throughout the entire North American Jewish world. We do a tremendous amount of information and referral. So somebody asked earlier on if they could post something, and it's coming out of Philadelphia, for instance, but it's something that's virtual. It doesn't matter where we live right now. You can access anything. So I think the more that we share with each other, the better that we all will be. And having access to the information and referrals is a key part of our, reason for being. And finally, we work on coaching and mentoring various professionals who wish to create more culture change, more inclusive settings in the Jewish community. So next slide, please. So what I wanted to do was sort of as a way of tying a bow on this fabulous content-rich presentation is to sort of focus on what are the things that are best practices, whether you're in person or conducting something virtually and learning that way. We all agreed that it's the connection that people feel over the content. So although we always want to feel that we're relaying really important information, creating those connections is still really important. And that could be a whole other webinar, how to do that in a virtual world, but it's really, really important. In the pre-pandemic world, if you were to walk into the most well-organized, differentiated classrooms and settings, it would be very clear without hearing anything said aloud or put into words via captioning, if there were visual cues of what is expected of the group. So if, for instance, your school or shul had information that no one's walking into and seeing anymore about, first we do this, then we do this, then we do that, that's something that you can still send ahead of time and have people utilize that even while our lives are much more in quarantine and everything is virtual. Again, after short bursts and bites of learning, we're not modeling it as well as we should today. We should have made everyone get up about every 15 minutes or so and just take a stretch break, a movement break. That's really important, either in person or even when learning online. And I'm talking about all people that I usually keep fidget toys and things around for me, just because I know that I focus better when something's around. So again, whether it's in person and you've got a box of fidgets or, or you're learning online, make sure that you remind people that they need to have what they need. And that is a big part of increasing accessibility even while we're not together in person. Communication. The importance, I cannot stress enough, of what Becca said in the beginning. about not just saying in your materials that, you know, call with needs or whatever. Have a specific person who owns it, who really takes responsibility for all accessibility and inclusion needs. Even now, when life is virtual, there's a lot that can be gathered via phone calls, emails, etc. So the need to poll people and ask in advance what they need, even if not being done in person, is still very vital to event success. And then the last piece that I'd like to say that I've really seen goes, you know, very far. Well, I would say, sorry, I skipped one of my points, was I've seen a lot of adult education over the past few months, and some is phenomenal, and some could be even better if the materials were shared ahead of time, because not everyone can read something and look at a screen and participate or type at the same time. So we need to give people, you know, the greatest, you know, sort of scaffolding so that success is possible. Again, whether we're in person or doing things virtually. And last but not least, when I say the last point on the slide is that we need to give people a choice for relaying outputs, takeaways, questions they may have. There are people who do find typing or even speaking on a Zoom call not their best way to proceed. So again, it's incumbent upon all of us who lead things and conduct things to say, if there is an issue that I can help with, please send, you know, figure out a way to send me an email, have, you know, your assistive device, you know, from your phone, send a question after the webinar is over, etc. Just making sure that even after events are conducted, that you're still thinking about how can things be even better next time, either in person or virtually. Next slide, please. So I think there's an image that's supposed to pop up. This is one of my favorites. I can't take any credit for it. Is it there? Is it there? I don't know. So maybe it's the next slide. It shows a classroom with, it's like almost like a cartoon. Yes, there it is. Okay. So there are different clusters of learners sitting, you know, together, and then there are plenty of people doing what it is that they need at the time that class is being, you know, held. But this is really a metaphor for saying each one of us needs something different, learns differently, experiences things differently. And so again, building choice into things and making sure that everyone gets what they need is primary. Next slide, please. Okay, so the last question that I wanted to ask the two panelists, and hopefully we will have time for other questions too, and if not, you'll hear from us individually and over email. If the Jewish community could make one change today, July 14th, 2020, in order to ensure greater accessibility for all of us in the Jewish community, what would you, Becca, and what would you, Lauren, recommend that we do vis-a-vis in person and or online to enhance virtual and in-person experiences? So you'll have to unmute. I don't know who wants to take the question first. Okay.
I'm going to ask Josh to stop sharing the slides so people can see us a little bit better for a few minutes of Q&A. Rebecca, did you want to go first, or would you like me to go first?
Go ahead, you go first.
So I'm going to kind of take a cop-out answer, which is like a an umbrella answer, in the sense that, especially in these conversations that we're all having about diversity and inclusion, and you hear different synagogues who have done initiatives over the last 5-10 years to bring in different groups of people, whether we're, and this may be different according to denomination as well, but whether we're talking about folks who, you know, where just one parent is Jewish, or we're talking about folks who are LGBTQ, the conversations on disability aren't kind of at that par quite yet. So the importance of most synagogues and Jewish institutions have thoughts on ensuring diversity and inclusion among their staff and their constituents and such, but they're not including disability as part of that diversity conversation. So I think the first step is to really prioritize including disability in all of those conversations. And that may be the case where your preschool might be very inclusive, but then the synagogue may not. So then what happens when kids grow up, for example, and now in this virtual event, virtual world, how are we ensuring that we are translating that to be inclusive of everyone now?
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I think one of the other things that comes to mind, and it actually came up in conversations with both of you, is about who owns it. Who owns the inclusion piece? Mm-hmm. And I know there were several questions about how people can communicate what their needs are, and that they should have a specific person, a go-to person to call or to email. But I want to be really careful about the fact that it doesn't just sit on one person's desk. That the inclusion piece and creating access for a community is not just the job of one professional, but that everybody owns it. So that, you know, within my agency, when I first started, any inclusion, any disability inclusion calls came to me, whether it was my program or somebody else's program. And I think we have changed that culture within our agency so that everybody owns it. I'm a resource person. I can connect those community professionals, those other departments, to the resources that they need. But it no longer is just my job to think about inclusion. And I think that within our synagogues and within our agencies and our programs throughout the entire community, I think that's one of the things that I can't emphasize more. That it shouldn't just sit on the desk of one person, but that we all own the piece of inclusion, that it's all of our responsibilities to do so.
Thank you. So Lauren, I think we had a couple sort of announcements that we're saving for the end about upcoming webinars and maybe some other things. Josh, if you can turn back on the slides. Thank you. Okay, Lauren.
Apologies, I was on mute. So we'd like to share, these are just a few useful resources and checklists. As I mentioned, you will be receiving an email with a link where you can actually download this PowerPoint yourself, but we wanted to share other resources that other communities have created that can be useful to you as well. Next slide, please. All right, I'd like to share a program that is being led by my colleague, Matan, different Matan, an individual named Matan, called Project Moses. And this project is based in LA, and it is recruiting talented, civic-minded Jews with disabilities to join a leadership cohort in the LA Jewish community. It is made possible by the generosity of the Jewish Community Foundation of Los Angeles, as well as other funders. So we're looking for people who have all different types of disabilities, whether that's mobility, vision, hearing, mental health, or anything else, who are kind of looking for that next step on how to maximize their potential. And then we will be working with them to connect them to Jewish organizations in the LA area, not disability related, because you might have an interest in education or the environment, and where those Jewish nonprofits can then take advantage of your talents as well. So if you're interested in this program, you'll get an opportunity for training, mentorship, and networking. So please reach out to us if that is something you're interested in. Next slide, please. I also want to share about our fellowship program that we run that is now completely virtual. This cohort is the first virtual cohort that we run in several different areas, and including in Jewish inclusion. And this fellow will actually work with my colleague Matan. So it's a virtual program ideal for people who want to gain skills and context while making a positive difference for people with disabilities. We're really looking for people with a passion for learning and exploring about how the different inclusion resources that exist This person should enjoy doing lots of research, interacting with other organizations, and deep thought about how to make this information useful for the entire community. Do you know someone who fits this bill, or perhaps maybe you are interested in this? These are for folks who are either in college or grad school, or didn't go to college or grad school but has equivalent experience, or lost their job due to COVID-19. So there is no upper age limit. So please let us, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to have a conversation. Next slide, please. So I want to invite everyone to join us next week. This training will be specifically on how to ensure a welcoming lexicon, words to use and words to not use, accessible websites, social media, and inclusive photos. So next week will also be chock full of really great, useful information. And thank you, Dory.
So I just, again, want to thank Respectability for putting together this entire series, and all the partners, the organizations who are partnering with us to make sure that they're not only well attended, but that lots of people who maybe aren't yet inclusion experts can go to a place where they can get the information that that's a great place to begin. Matan Koch of Respectability wants me to remind people we will be sending out soon a survey. So again, that we can keep improving from week to week on what it is that we offer. So I want to thank again both Becca Winetic from Metro West Able in Metro West, New Jersey, and Lauren Applebaum from Respectability for your time. And lots of people are saying thank you in the chat. So just we'll keep the momentum going. So thanks for tuning in, everyone.